Today we consider the vast size of the coming economic stimulus that will see central bank balance sheets soar to levels difficult to currently comprehend. So let's dive on in. Now, this channel provides global macro insights and champions the importance of sound money in a world gone crazy, so please do consider subscribing. Just last week we saw IMF calls for a new Bretton Woods moment. So far we have looked at what this could mean for a new monetary arrangement and how China has the IMF in a real stranglehold in this video. But what is also clear, as Sprott Money's David Brady pointed out this week in an excellent article, the link is in the description, is that the next financial stimulus will be vast and it will be global. Now, in her speech, IMF head Georgieva stated that while the global banking system entered the crisis with high capital and liquidity buffers, there is a weak tail of banks in many emerging markets. This clearly highlights the fund's concern of a global banking crisis, which they believe could originate in developing economies. Distressed banks in emerging markets may lead to financial contagion, which could weaken balance sheets of so-called global systemically important banks, or GSIBs. These banks are interwoven into the global financial system through leverage, swap agreements and other derivative products that could have a domino effect upon other GSIBs, who then knock down others, and so on. The IMF head then goes on to state that we must take measures to prevent the build-up of financial risks over the medium term. Yet very little information is provided, but in reality we all know that this is likely to come down to the IMF centralising the international financial arrangement under its control. If, and it appears to be a big if, it can wrench sufficient power from the United States, because after all the US dollar has the most to lose as the global reserve currency. The IMF would then seek to integrate their system with domestic country CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. This will facilitate IMF funds to member countries, possibly on a proportionate basis, so as to devalue all currencies simultaneously. This increasing centralisation of financial control is less likely to see the need for bail-ins and bail-outs, as it provides a convenient bribe to depositors to collect their deposits from their CBDC wallets. But what certainly struck me was the repeated use of the medium term throughout her presentation. Clearly this highlights to us that this stimulus will not be delivered imminently, but it will be on its way. And where will it be directed? Well, in concert with the World Economic Forum and their Great Reset is the notion of green investment, or building back better, a slogan we keep on seeing. At the same time, carbon taxes are set to soar and airlines may eventually be left to go bust. And so we'll see more spending, more debt, this time to the IMF as it expands its balance sheet from its paltry $1 trillion or so. And more digital currency creation. And we know that CBDCs will allow greater extension of Marxist monetary theory, which will facilitate time-sensitive universal basic incomes or negative interest rates, which will further debase our currency's purchasing power. But there's plenty more stimulus to come. Now, in this paper, the role of monetary policy in shifting a U-shaped recession to a V-shaped rebound, senior Fed economist Michael Kiley says that the Fed will need to counteract the impact of taking interest rates to near zero levels. After all, a recession normally requires interest rate reductions of around 5.5%. But when this crisis hit, the Fed funds rate was at 1.75%. This paper makes it clear that QE alone will not be enough to stimulate a recovery. Without further stimulus, he argues that this effective lower bound would amplify even a mild recession. His analysis leads him to reveal two additional insights. First, QE supports economic activity by easing balance sheet constraints on financial intermediaries and relaxing financial conditions more broadly. As a result, the productive capacity of the economy is preserved as far as he sees it. But he also goes on to state the effects of QE are similar to those of reductions in short-term nominal interest rates, before confessing that quantitative easing runs to diminishing marginal returns, as he states that the additional impact of much larger amounts of QE is minimal. That is, QE runs into diminishing returns in terms of effects on output, the labour market and inflation, if it is not accompanied by additional accommodation through lower short-term interest rates than implied by the central bank's normal reaction function. And so from reading this paper, there are really three things to take away. Number one, that the Fed will continue to monetize the deficit, or rather, should we say, purchase bonds equal to around 30% of US GDP, which is somewhere around $6.5 trillion. Given the original $3 trillion already pledged, we can expect to see the Fed's balance sheet soar to $10.5 trillion across coming months, somewhere around 50% of US GDP. And as we have already discussed, the number one driving force behind higher precious metal prices has tended more recently to be the Fed's balance sheet. But of course, this is just the start of the balance sheet expansion, with many believing we will soon see figures as high as $20 trillion on the Fed's balance sheet. Secondly, the paper highlights that this QE must be accompanied by lower short-term interest rates, that is, negative nominal rates. This is why we see the desperate need to rush towards the Fed coin and CBDCs more generally. The impact of this is profound for metals and cryptocurrencies. Third, that the paper concludes by stating that there is a great deal of uncertainty about the effects of COVID-19, the effects of QE, and economic dynamics in general. As a result, the simulations herein are at best one suggestive step towards understanding appropriate monetary policy responses. The translation here is clear. The Fed does not know what it's doing. It's relying on untested models, but what is apparent is that Western economies are on life support and those in charge are way out of their depth, but they will continue to kick the can down the road with fiscal and monetary insanity on steroids, as David Brady puts it. And just to reiterate this, the Bank for International Settlements now talk of fiscal and monetary policy coordination. This will utilise CBDCs as the complete game changer, allowing the Fed to make deposits straight to Fed coin wallets. So while the short-term prospects for precious metals remain uncertain, the medium to longer-term outlook has never looked better. Thanks so much for joining me. Please do consider subscribing, following me on Twitter and brand YouTube, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye bye.